Phonetics and Phonology, an overview 1 by Dr. Layla Ghalban. Speech is our first medium of communication. It is true that there are other forms such as body language, sign language, and written language, but speech is and will remain our primary means of communication. It's through speech that people make judgments about us and make guesses about our age, our education, our personal traits, and also develop attitudes either positive or negative towards us. Human speech is a very complicated task. It involves a lot of puzzling processes. Let's first see how speech chain works. Speech chain has three parts. The first is the speaker, the second is the listener, and between them, or the medium, which is ear. The speaker formulates ideas in the brain. It gives orders to the motor nerves to move muscles and the organs of speech to make sounds and turn them into sound waves. That can be sound waves as a series of vibrations travel through the air and get into the ear of the listener and vibrate the eardrum. The vibrating eardrum causes the vibration of three little bones here called hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Their vibration goes through this spiral shape, which is called the cochlea, and which transfers these vibration into nerve signals that move to the brain to convert them into ideas and so on. On the other hand, or meanwhile, there is a feedback link which is established by the speaker. He or she try to listen to what he or she has said in order to check if what he said is what he intended or not. So let's look at the bottom of the figure. The speech chain starts with a linguistic message, or it starts at a linguistic level, and then physiological level. As you see, when organs of speech work, and then acoustic level when sounds turn into sound waves traveling in the air, and then when the listener receives the sound waves through his or her ear, this is something called physiological. So we have a physiological level again, and then when the processing takes place and the message moves up to the brain, this is what we call the linguistic level. So we start with the linguistic level, the brain of the speaker, and we end with the linguistic level, the brain of the listener. And that chain goes on and on as we see. Okay, let's go to how phonetics and speech is studied in different forms and by different sciences. For example, music study speech in order to know the neurobiology of speech and music perception and what are the shared features in this regard, using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. Psycholinguistics studies speech in order to know how babies or how children acquire speech or acquire language acquisition in general, language processing or speech processing, speech loss, speech disorder, and so on. Philosophy studies sound because it is related to meaning, and meaning is one of the core areas in philosophy since the dawn of history. Literacy theory also studies speech in order to see the what's called sound symbolism, rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, parallelism, etc., and the impact of all these tools on on the recipients of the literary works. Sociology also overlaps with speech studies or phonetics and phonology, as we're gonna see, and we have something called sociophonetics. This science studies the structure, the phonetic structures which vary in response to the different social functions and the different situational factors. Sociophonetics deals with the relationship between speech and nationality, how our speech reflects our nationality, our regional and social membership or affiliation, our age, our gender, our and also the different situations of speaking and degree of formality and the social distancing between speakers and so on. Also, we have semantics and phonetics and phonology also overlap, and we have something called the phonosemantics, which studies the relationship between sound structure of a word and its meaning. This is related to also to philosophy. The sound that constitute, we know that the sound that constitute a word had their own inner meaning, which causes certain associations in the listener's mind. For example, closed vowels produce the effect of smallness and voiceless consonants. Are to some extent unpleasant. They have developed unpleasant meanings or rude associations. Whereas voice consonants, they are associated with intimacy and positive emotions and so on. Also, sounds are associated with certain colors, let's say, phonosemantics deal with that and how colors are processed and what are the meanings that and connotation that each one develops in a particular society. Pragmatics also interacts with phonetics and phonology in order to, especially phonetics, in order to have something called pragma phonetics. First, we know that pragmatics is a study of meaning that's intended by the speaker. And pragma phonetics deals or analyzes the functioning and speech effects of sound system of language, how language or how phonetics and phonetic tools allow us to color our speech in order to achieve certain aims and certain goals within certain social and communicative context. Also, phonetics and, of course, phonology interact with artificial intelligence, which is mushroomingly taking over nowadays and is giving unprecedented fruits, and it's the future. It is marking and coloring the future of humanity as we see nowadays around us. Everything, artificial intelligence is around us in everywhere and at every moment and in everything we do. Artificial intelligence works to develop sound recognition software, as we see. Also sound text conversion, machine translation, and simultaneous interpreting, develop applications and devices which help people turn speech into text and make simultaneous interpreting and so on. Phonetics and phonology also are related to syntax because it gives us some hint on the grammatical category of a word. For example, the difference between object and object, object as a noun and object as a verb. The main difference is in placing stress. Also, we have phonetics and phonology related to applied linguistics, basically language teaching, because many books have been developed using phonetic transcription, and actually phonetics and phonology have worked a great deal in order to help the field of applied linguistics, basically language teaching, and especially foreign language teaching, which is a big industry, which includes lots of sciences such as lexicology, semantics, syntax, and other science related sciences. So here we see that at the core we have phonetics, because this is the raw materials, the ingredients, the sounds, the raw sounds that are produced by humans, and once they are organized and given meaning, and we start to know the patterning and how they are functioning in a particular language, we move to the area of phonology, and then the circles start to go wider and wider to interact with so many sciences, as we have said. And let's move to another area, which is what is phonetics. Phonetics studies how speech sounds are produced, as we said here, when we look at the role of the speaker, transmitted, talking about the medium of moving the sound signal from the speaker to the listener, and receiving how sounds are received by humans, and what are the physiological and the cognitive and neurological processes that are involved in all these things. And this is why we have a number of branches in phonetics. We have cognitive phonetics, which deal with what's going in our brains, and what's going on in our brains, and how sounds are created, and how signals, speech signals, are created and are processed, and so on. We have also articulatory phonetics that focuses on description of sounds in terms of how speech organs work in order to produce sounds or speech. Acoustic phonetics is related to how speech signals are described physically in terms of the frequency, the resonances, the timing or duration of the acoustic signal, and a lot of, or a bundle of features that must be there in order to allow us as listeners to process. So we process the acoustic signal, which includes how the sounds are created in the vocal by the vocal folds in our larynx, and then travels through our vocal tract and get amplified, and all these things we catch and we understand through acoustic phonetics. Auditory phonetics deal with how people receive sounds, understand them, and turn them into ideas, and what are the neurological and physiological steps or elements that are involved in this task. Phonetics describes the neurological pace of speech. When we speak, this goes into a number of steps. First, planning. We plan. We have something to say, and then we give order to motor cortex, and we supervise that in order to make sure that we are saying what we really want to say. And we also supervise the work of a speech organ if there is mis speech, or we have a slip of tongue or something like that. And then we get the acoustic properties of speech as listeners to identify what are these signals, and so on. Phonetics also studies all possible sounds human vocal apparatus can make in all human languages, and try phoneticians try to write symbols to describe or to represent these sounds that are there in most of the human languages they studied, and they have developed something called IPA chart, which includes, or International Phonetic Alphabet Chart, which includes symbols to describe sounds of all studied human languages. Then we move to another area, which is phonology. We have to say that both phonetics and phonology are working basically on phone, or which is sound. So they are interrelated, as we're gonna see, and we shouldn't divide them sharply, because it's so difficult to single them out, as we're gonna see later on. Phonology is a narrowed down phonetics. When babies are born, they are able to pronounce all sounds of human languages. But later on, they filter these sounds and they pick their parents' sounds. And they get these patterns fixed in their brains and create neural categories, which get fixed by time, and they become later on not they don't have the flexibility to learn new pattern, new sounds. This ability to speak sounds of all human languages they lose by time. So phonology is the study of speech sounds of a language, and because each language picks a number of regularly used contrastive sounds called phonemes. Phonology describes how phonemes are organized and described and distributed to make the sound system of each language. How sounds are organized in our brain, how phonetic categories are created based on generalizations and ignoring details, because no single speaker says the same sound or utterance twice. It's like signing. If you sign your name, for example, several times, it's never the same every time you sign in a different way. But because your brain ignores these details, we look at these different signatures as one, and we say this signature belongs to X or to Y. Why do we do that? Because our brain cannot look at all these details. It will be very exhaustive, and our brains could explode out of this billion of things we should know about speech and we should know about the world. And this is why we look at the general pattern and we ignore the details. This is exactly what happens when we listen to speech and to speech sounds. Every one of us speaks differently and speaks even a single sound differently. We never speak a single sound as the same. However, We ignore all these variation as long as the minimum requirements of having sound are there. Phonological knowledge is unconscious, and let's, for example, give you the words such as hegm and heg. If I ask an English speaker which word of them is English, he's going to say that him is not likely to be English at all because it starts with H and or ha and then ga, and this couple of sounds cannot follow or cannot go together, and then the word heg is not English. The word heg is not right now is not an English word, but it could be an English word because it agrees with or satisfies the laws and rules of a word or sound occurrences or sound combination. We can start an English word with a ha followed by an eh followed by a ga. This is possible. So it's no wonder that one day we can have this word. Of course, English speakers they know this, but they do not know that they know this because phonological knowledge is unconscious, and also phonetic knowledge. How it's there must be a memory, a motor memory for how sounds are pronounced. Unless we have this memory of how sounds and how stress and how intonation and how rhythm are pronounced or are spoken or done in speech, we will not be able to do that. So memory or motor memory is also something that is that is conscious and that's unconscious. So let's look at how phonology and phonetics interact, and sometimes what are the shared things between them. By studying both phonetics and phonology of a particular language, we can understand the use of sounds. Phonetics is a group of phonetic sciences, and phonology studies the higher level of speech organization. Number two, for example, or let's say, for example, vowel length is measured in phonetics, and it is a phonological rule because vowels are inherently shorter after voiceless consonants, and vice versa. For example, live and life. All native speakers of English know that, even unconsciously. And this is something which is cognitive. Phonetics helps us to verify that and to measure through measuring duration or time of the pronunciation of these words. Phonetics can give us this data. So both phonetics and phonology cooperate in order to explain and identify rules instrumentally rather than impressionistically. If we listen to live and life, we can say impressionistically that live is longer and life is shorter. But phonetics, especially acoustic phonetics, help us to do that instrumentally and give data and give figures and give spectrograms and so on. So it's a simplistic view to divide them. Both phonetics and phonology aspire to generalization about speech across languages. Some people say that phonetics is universal and it applies to all languages. This is correct, but also phonology aspires to generalization. And phonological theory addresses phonological processes in all human languages, such as voicing, assimilation, deletion. Phonology and phonological theory try to see what are the shared features and the, that that are among all phonologists of all human languages. So aspiring to generalizations is not restricted to phonetics. It also spreads to and stretches to include phonology. Secondly, to say that phonetics deals with concrete things such as sound waves or movement of speech organs, this doesn't mean that the mental organization of sounds is not concrete or real. It is how we move our speech organs, how we get our tongue be in a particular position to pronounce a particular sound, to make stress in a particular syllable, to get rhythm in a particular way. All these things are stored in our mind. They are mental. They are not only things which are. And who says that mental things are not concrete or real? They are, but they are not observable. They are not as easily observable or as easily measurable as sound waves. So phonological knowledge is real. Phonological knowledge is mental. Phonological knowledge is concrete to some extent. But the way to measure this and to verify this is different from the way we measure sound waves and other phonetic correlates. However, thanks to X-ray and MRI, we are now able to check brain imaging during the activities of certain speech activities like speaking and listening and processing and so on. So now we can see online how things are taking place inside our brains. So our brains are no longer black boxes that are opaque and we cannot see what's happening there. No, we can. And so to say that phonology is not concrete and it's abstract, this is not exact to a great extent. The data phonetics provides, such as sound waves, picture, and so on, will remain of little value until we relate this to speakers and listeners' linguistic system. Speakers know sound variation that matters and sound variation that do not matter. Also, to know, for example, how to combine sounds into syllables, how to and combine syllables to form words and phrases. All these things are done by a mix or a result of a mix between the concrete data or the stimulus or the phonetic signal and what we store in our mind, because our mind or our brains have mental copies of every sound we hear, and every every intonation pattern we hear, every stress pattern, and every stress rule we have mental copies to that. And what we do is that we match between what we hear and what is in us, our mental, repertoire, our mental patterning, our mental memory regarding how sounds behave and what are the rules and what are the organization and pattern of these sounds regarding phonemes, allophones, stress pattern, rhythm patterns and intonation and all forms of phonetic and phonological tools and phenomena. So there must be no sharp contrast between them, and let's know that both phonetics and phonology collaborate in describing languages and explaining to us a very important thing or part of what makes us human. And this is exactly what happens when linguists and artificial intelligence technology specialists do and or try to do to build speech recognition system or software based on phonetics and phonology, as well as a wide array of sciences to teach computer and machine to process human speech and also to talk. And this is what we see in Siri and in Alexa and other smart speakers, and also in all applications that turn sound into text and simultaneous interpreting and so on. Then I'm gonna finish with what a distinction between phonemes and allophones. When we hear speech, we can break it into segments. These segments are called phonemes, which are minimal contrastive sound units in a language. If we change a phoneme in a particular word, we change meaning. So phonemes are sounds which make a change in the meaning, and they are contrastive units. And each phoneme is composed of a number of distinctive features. For example, a sound such as b, we can say that is a bilabial sound, it's a voice sound. Also, it's a stop sound and other features. So the totality of these features are or what makes a particular phoneme a phoneme. Okay, a phoneme is pronounced in different ways according to the context in which it occurs. So a phoneme is a family of allophones. These variants, allophones are variants or different ways a particular phoneme is pronounced. Phonetics is concerned with providing a detailed description of these variations, these allophones. For example, a sound such as t is a phoneme. Why it's a phoneme? Because if we change t in, for example, 10, and we say done, we get a new word. But t is pronounced differently in different words due to the influence of the surrounding sounds. It could be aspirated as in 10. T is aspirated t. Audible puff of air is associated with it, and it comes initially, as we see. It can be unaspirated, as we have here. Stay, the sa makes ta lose its aspiration. It can be flap, and if we go to American English, and it could be so ta becomes j as little. It can be glottalized, as in Quran, and it can be nasalized, as in Eden, it becomes Eden. Okay. It can be nasalized due to the influence of the na, which is a nasal consonant. So the surrounding sounds affect our pronunciation of t. our brain look at ta in all these words, which is which in which ta is pronounced differently, physically and physiologically speaking, but it ignores these differences and say that it is ta. Ta in ten, ta in stay, ta in little, and ta in current, and ta in Iran. It's if you ask any one, it's ta, although there are so many kinds of ta here, so many allophones. So allophones are different variants, different phonetic variants of the same phoneme, and this is the relationship between phonemes and allophones. Phonemes are abstracted units, which are stored in our mind. Our brains abstract these variations in order to make generalizations and ignore the different actual pronunciation of ta in its actual surroundings and actual contexts. With this, I come to the end of my lecture. Thank you.